Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good of them who love God and are called according to his purpose. It doesn't matter what you're going through. It's going to work out. What you're going through doesn't compare to the glory within. If you are to suffer, then you are to reign with him.
What can separate me
from the love of Jesus?
Nothing separates me from him.
And we have a promise that says all things. For the good who love him, all things, everything, works for the good of him and who are if we are to suffer,
then we are to reign with him. What can separate me from the love of
nothing separates me.
Nothing separates me from you. What can separate me? And many of us have probably heard this song before. Let the poor say I am rich, let the weak say I am strong. But I always wondered, when will we actually be strong? When will I actually be rich? And I realized that I could go to God's word, and like God, can speak some things into existence that aren't as though they were. So it's time to speak some things into your existence. It's time to speak prosperity. It's time to speak happiness. It's time to prophesy victory. Help me sing this. I've got victory. I shall prosper. No longer shall I be bound. God has made me free. I've got victory. I shall prosper. No longer shall I be bound. God has made me free. Come on, let's take it up. Said I've got victory. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Give you a brief moment. It's 7 o'clock. A brief moment to get online, and I guess that's what I'll make my initial appeal, so you all can get in here and hear what we have to say, ask your questions. Again, you're here tuning in tonight for the vaccine, COVID-19, Christ in our communities conversation. Let me give you, I guess you could say, the prolegomena of all this and how it came to be. As many of you all know, I am now the lead pastor, founding senior pastor, whatever you want to call it, of the Collide Church. Yes, we started a church in the middle of a pandemic, and who does that? I don't know. I guess it's me. And as I was thinking about the responsibility I have to people, first being a professed Christian, right? And being a spiritual leader, of course, we're in a global pandemic. And yes, we are trusting and believing God for everything to work out, for it to be over. But at some point in time, we have to reconcile faith and science, common sense and spirituality. Come on. And these have to intersect somehow. And ultimately, when it comes to certain topics that you don't know about, you should probably let those who do know about it do the talking. So to make a long story short, I called a good friend of mine, the first panelist we'll introduce today. And I said, Sir, Gene, we go way back. I say, what if you could just have my mouth for 20 minutes on a Sunday morning, what would you tell the people? And the things he explained to me about the vaccine, about COVID-19, just blew my mind. Then many of you all saw the post I put on Facebook. I said, hey, I need a nurse or I need a doctor, because the nurses I know right now are tied up and the doctors I know right now are tied up. And thank you, Tammy Campbell. You recommended my now new friend and sister Alex, and we'll introduce her in a moment. Wonderful conversations, mine open even more. Then I remembered, wait a minute, I'm only a year or two behind one of Baldwin Wallace's most brightest minds, Dr. Shanina Knight. And I reached out to her and she was available. So now we have this wonderful panel to help us first understand, because it's easy to demonize and dismiss things we don't understand. This is the plight of people of color in America when you don't understand diversity, when you don't understand something that's different. So in all you're getting, get an understanding. So we are here tonight to do this and to locate ourselves in this narrative and to discover what is our responsibility, especially if you're a person of faith. How should people of faith respond? We know that God can do it. We know that he's able. But we also know that there's some people who thought you could just blow on COVID. COVID, I blow on you. COVID's still here. We know the saints rebuked COVID in Jesus' name. I've come against COVID. COVID is still here. And it's probably going to be here a long time. So we have to find ourselves in this somehow and reconcile where do we stand, what we believe, and what do we do. But I believe what you know will influence what we believe. So having said that, thank you for always tuning in. Thank you who will watch this later on. Let's get to it. My wonderful, wonderful panel. I'm so excited to bring them on. First, I want you to introduce a good friend of mine, longtime friend. Her name is Gene Baker. He is the Regional Account Director of the U.S. market for Michigan, Indiana, host of Gene's Tune-Up Time on the Sean Fair Digital TV Network, hosted by Onstage Plus. He's part of the Fair consultation group, and he's the one that really started this conversation with me. So welcome, my brother Gene. Thank you for being here on tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Is there anything I didn't cover in terms of who you are, what you bring to the table?
No, you're good. I've worked in the healthcare pharmaceutical industry for 20 years. I've seen a lot. I understand a lot of the science. And I understand the underlying health conditions that are really impacting our people that make this pandemic even worse. So I understand the seriousness of it. And I think it's part of my duty to share my knowledge, share my insight with our people.
Well, thank you for being here. Next, I'm like Steve Harvey, coming to the stage. Put your hands together for, no, but her name is Alexandria Rosa, And she is a registered nurse and women's health and wellness coach. She's been in healthcare for over 15 years. She has a background in long-term care, home care, hospice, inpatient and outpatient care, sexual assault nurse examiner, emergency intensive care. She's done it all for the last 6 years, and she's currently a teacher. She's a nurse educator, clinical instructor, and she's working on her doctoral degree. So she's at the University of Ashland, my alma mater as well, for my master's degree, but she is doing it. We want to welcome her, Alexandria Rosa. Thank you for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited.
Is there anything about you that I didn't cover that you need the people to know?
Oh, no, you covered it quite well.
All right. Well, last and not least, and I could read on and on and on, but she'll slap me later on if I do this. So needless to say, my friend and fellow BW alumni, matter of fact, all three of us, sorry, Alex, Gene, myself, and Dr. Shanina Knighton, we all went to Baldwin Wallace, Yellow Jackets. She is a clinical nurse scientist and infection preventionist and a KL2 scholar and faculty at Case Western Reserve University School of Nursing and Engineering. I could say more, but what I'm really trying to say is if there's anybody on this panel that knows what they're talking about and to whom we all need to listen, it is none other than Dr. Shanina Knight. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. So I am going to say that I equally feel the same way about my colleagues that are here in terms of panelists. So I've had a great time of being able to learn from them as well. And so looking forward to this talk. And thank you so much, JC, for organizing this. So thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here. It was so needed. So I'll say this at the onset. We want to give a lot of information and share what we know and what we've learned in application. But you may have some questions during this ordeal. So I'll be checking Facebook. I'll be posting questions. Give us your questions and not the easy ones. How long have you been studying? No. Give us the hard questions. And we're going to ask some hard questions because we're doing this for you. I know where I stand, but no, I'm playing. But no, we want you to have knowledge and to make decisions not based on rumor, conspiracy, or even gut feeling all that much, but on truth, data, facts, and then for the believers in conjunction with the Holy Spirit. All right. So please post your comments, post your questions. We will get to them when I see them. But for now, let's go and let's start with this one. Most people are asking, how was this vaccine made so quickly? It took years to come up with other ones. It took years to get this one and that one. And how do we have a vaccine for COVID-19 and flu been here since the beginning of time? The common cold has been here. Y'all can't cure cancer. There's nothing for cancer yet outside of chemotherapy, but there's a vaccine in under a year. Something doesn't add up with that. Let's talk to that. Anyone, go ahead.
All right, I guess I'll dig into that a little bit, and then I'll pass it on. So there's so much to unpack there, right? And we've heard so many iterations of this question. You know, like you said, you know, how come we don't have the cure for cancer? How come we don't have the cure for diabetes or whatever disease? But all of a sudden, we can have this cure for COVID-19, this novel virus. So I think it's a valid question, right? I think we all ask that question. And what you want to do is just kind of start to peel that onion layer back and say, okay, did this really start 9 months ago? And all of a sudden we have a vaccine? And the answer to that is no. The technology that is used for this particular vaccine that we have right now actually started back in the early 90s. You know, this thing was being, you know, developed and studied. This technology was being studied, and ultimately a company was formed, Moderna, and the founder of that company was someone who was one of the originators of this research. So this has been going on for a long time. So they've actually studied this technology in a lot of different disease states. What happened, though, was a number of things. One, you don't just decide, hey, you know what, we're going to study this in COVID-19, although they were. What you need is a number of things to happen. You need funds. You need a lot of subjects to study it on. And you need some urgency to do it. And you need some help. So what they found with this virus, without getting too technical, they couldn't just use this technology on the virus. They had to figure out a way to kind of slow this virus from kind of cloaking itself, for lack of a better word. So once they figured out that, and that was from a scientist in another country who shared that, once they had that, then they were like, boom, we got it. It's green light. We have the technology. Now we know how to target this thing appropriately, and boom, we can do it. So this was not a 9-month thing. This was years in the making. They just needed a little push, a little help, and a little sharing of science. So this pandemic allowed scientists around the world, from government to academia to big pharma to small pharma, all these scientists are starting to share. And so once they started to share, that sped the research process up. And then, oh, by the way, from a research standpoint, typically you need a lot of patients to do studies, right? And if you were studying some, obscure disease or virus that didn't have a lot of patients, it would take a long time to get up enough patients to make a study powered for safety and efficacy. But with this pandemic and with government, National Institute of Health, support, all of a sudden they said, you know what? We have all these patients. We're in the middle of a pandemic. All these patients were enrolled. We got the data. We got the data relatively quickly. And oh, by the way, because everybody was watching this, all the data is open to everyone. So we should feel very safe of the data because so many people are watching it. So I'll leave it there. But the point of all that is to say this started a long time ago. And then a number of factors early this year kind of came together. And some of it was luck as well to bring us to this point today.
So I want to add on to that, because I think something that's interesting when we talk about, or JT, to your question about, well, why now? Why all of a sudden? Coronavirus is not anything that's new. So I think for people to understand, it's been around since the 70s. We had, SARS. So there was a severe acute respiratory virus that we had. We also had MERS, which was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome or virus. These were around. We just experienced these within the past 20 years, And so just because, let's say, there are different strains of coronavirus, they may have had different causes, they're still coronaviruses. One thing that's interesting when we think about this particular technology, just as Jane mentioned, it was tried for Ebola. Guess what? It didn't work. It was tried for Zika. It didn't work. It was tried for a numerous amount of other viruses. It didn't work. It's crazy because when people look at COVID-19, they think that this is the first thing that we've encountered. H1N1 could have been as bad as COVID-19, even though it's not caused by the same bug, okay? We could have had the same situation happen with the Hong Kong flu. This could have been a Spanish flu. It's just that this particular strain is doing as much damage as it is. The other piece that Jean didn't mention is in the past, when we're talking about the FDA process, we're talking about studies where the process is so streamlined to where it's like, oh no, we need X amount of studies, X amount of data on animals. We need X amount of studies before we can get to a phase 1 trial. We need a X amount of studies before we get to phase 2. We need X amount of studies to get to phase 3. How this differs is that these companies typically are doing the research on their own. They typically have their own R&D department, but you've had a switch when you have the National Institutes of Health and government funding entities of healthcare researchers or healthcare scientists that said, we're going to put our money in here because we need to find a solution to this fast. That means that R&D is not hindered by the financial dollars that would typically be coming out of their pockets. So simultaneously, unlike any other process, because of the severity, because of everything that's going on right now with COVID, you have manufacturing that's happening all at once. You have clinical trials 1, 2, and 3, which again is unheard of, all happening at once. You have funding that's there to support it. You also have somebody that is, I see a question come up and I think it's interesting. It says, if it's novel, how were they already working on it? So when you talk about the process itself being novel, or are you talking about the actual virus being novel? Because there's a difference. I believe what Gene is talking about is he's talking about the actual technology. So unlike flu virus, where someone would typically inject a live attenuated virus and weaken it in order to be able to give a flu vaccine, mutates and changes every year. This technology works in a different manner in that it's not injecting actual coronavirus or a weakened version of coronavirus in you, which to me is promising, because with us not understanding the long-term effects and still discovering things now, that's promising. Because I'll be honest, when I thought that they were injecting or taking that same process that they were doing for flu and putting it into a weakened form, I said, no, I'm not taking that, because then that means that we'll have a weakened form of that virus in our body. This technology works different in that our DNA is the blueprint. So our DNA is the blueprint in terms of it tells the cells what it is to do. You then have the DNA, you have the RNA. So the RNA has the messenger. So that's actually what goes back and it tells the actual cells what it is they need to do. They've created this technology to be able to identify the protein that's associated with COVID. So they've actually done a blueprint, not that's actual coronavirus itself, but it's almost as cloning. They've pretty much cloned the actual virus itself, not the virus. And they've said, hey, we can now have messenger RNA be able to recognize the actual virus. And when it recognizes the virus, it then says, you know what? That's a bad enemy right there. That's a bad enemy in our body. And now that it recognizes it, it actually helps you to build up antibodies to fight against it. This differs from a lot of the people that we're seeing dying right now, a lot of the people that are suffering from bad symptoms, in that their body is not having enough of an illicit response to not only just build up antibodies against coronavirus during the time in which they're fighting it, but also the question is will it protect them the next time around as well? And so I think that that's a very important understanding, is that we're talking about a technology. So the same way that we're watching cars evolve and everything else, when we're talking about something that's novel, I see a lot of technology that we use and we apply it to other things. So I hope that that answers your question in regards to when you ask if it's novel, how are we already working on it? This is us taking the novel technology and applying it to a different problem and hoping that it works.
This is good. Thank you. So my next question would be, not a question, but more so, I guess, something to talk about. Alex, what have you seen, and Dr. Knight and you too, and Gene, you as well. What have you seen being nurses, being in hospitals? What is your firsthand experience, and especially to those who maybe are still on the end of the spectrum that would suggest that COVID-19 is a hoax or not that big of a deal, and just 99% recover from it, Let's take that.
So I can tell you firsthand from me working in the hospital and seeing patients, just to come to a hospital and to see an emergency room be entirely shut down, to not be able to take gunshot wounds or heart attacks or strokes, any kind of serious injury, because they have too many, sick patients with COVID in their emergency room that are in machines that are in an environment that's not really set up to be, in the type of environment that we would want them to be in, like in an isolation type environment. They're just in the ER, and the issue becomes they have no place to go because the ICUs are all filled up with COVID patients. And It is happening. The hospitals are full. I've seen it at many hospitals. I did travel nursing and have worked at a couple other facilities and have done clinical work at other hospitals. It is happening at all hospitals. And these patients that are in the ICU, they are there for the extended length of time. And like we were talking about the other day, my doctoral project, I'm looking at reducing length of stay, especially in the ICU for these COVID patients. And all the COVID patients do is just, they stay there so long, they take up so many resources and so much money. And people think hospitals are making money off of having these patients in the hospital, when in reality, they're just costing the whole healthcare system more money because they're in there for so long. And though that backlog in the emergent or in the ICU, it just creates problems throughout the whole hospital. And like we were talking about outpatient surgeries and surgical patients, like you have to be very careful that we're not putting those surgical patients by the COVID patients. And that really limits, again, the amount of rooms and where you're putting people. And then that impacts the whole hospital, every single different department in that hospital, maternity, pediatrics, any surgeries, any outpatient procedures, anything in the hospital, it all gets affected, and it all just cascades right on top of each other. So it's just this multi-level problem that it's having. And I can tell you personally, when COVID first came out, it probably was almost about a year ago in the early springtime, I was working on an assignment, and this was when I was doing some outpatient surgery stuff, and they stopped doing the outpatient surgeries because they really wanted to mobilize the nurses to different areas. So all of the nurses in my area ended up screening visitors for COVID symptoms, checking temperatures, all of that. And at that time, that's when it first started coming out that the droplet, that it was being transferred airborne. And so I had come to work. I've got 3 small kids, I've got a husband, I have a family. And so I'm thinking, with my nursing background and my nursing knowledge, like, I know if I have a patient who is an airborne droplet precaution, I need to wear a mask. So in going into this type of environment and knowing I was going to have to be screening people that possibly had COVID, I was going to wear a mask. And so I rolled up to work with my own mask on and my own K95 mask on. And I had a gentleman approach me, and I didn't know who this guy was. And he questioned why I was wearing a mask. And I said, well, I'm wearing a mask because of, COVID is out there, and I want to protect myself and protect other people. And he said, well, where did you get it? And I'm like, it's my own mask from home. And I said, the hospital didn't supply me one. This is my own mask. And shortly after that, I had 2 other people approach me, the supervisor and a nurse manager. And I pretty much got told that my mask, me wearing a mask, was making people nervous and was portraying the image that the hospital did not have control over this virus and the situation, and that I was pretty much scaring people and to take my mask off because of a public image issue. And I flat out refused. And I said, I will not take my mask off. I'm protecting myself, my family, and other people that are here that I'm working with, and visitors. Like, it's the social thing. Like, I know that that's, as a nurse, that's what I'm supposed to do. And end of story. Next day, I did not get called back to come into work because I refused to take my mask off and stood up for myself and for my health and for other people's health, what I think. So it was just quite an experience. And I've seen so many other nurses that have gone through that, and especially with this whole shortage of PPE and everything, which is a whole nother subject that we can get into. But I mean, COVID, it's real, it's out there. And there's been people that have been, getting ready to be put on a ventilator and still denying the truth that they do have the virus, and they still think it's a hoax. But we're getting ready to intubate them because they can't breathe anymore. And it's just it's so heartbreaking to try to talk with these people and talk with their families. But I mean, it's there, it's real. And the other piece of that is that in the ICU, typically, we have really sick patients, and we're seeing younger and younger patients coming in with COVID. And a lot of these younger patients have no, they're not diabetic, they don't have asthma, they don't have COPD, nothing like that. But what ends up happening is the way that COVID affects the way your blood thickens, your coagulability, so how your blood thickens, it kind of creates like some clots sometimes, and the clots are getting stuck in people's kidneys. And what's happening is people are ending up on dialysis for the rest of their lives. And these are like young 30-year-old patients having to be on dialysis for the rest of their life, which is causing a burden for themselves, for their families, and putting them at risk for so many other diseases and sicknesses later on and throughout their life, not just because they had COVID now, but all throughout the rest of their life, because they're going to have to be on dialysis. And it's just, that's a really common one, is the having to be on dialysis afterwards. Not to mention the confusion that I've been having people report to me after they've recovered from COVID. They have confusion, they have brain fog, they have breathing issues, lethargy, like the list goes on. And so now we have this whole other group of patients that are in the recovery phase, but they're still having all these lingering symptoms. And it's so hard to deal with this acute phase of these COVID patients that are sick with COVID, and then all of these recovering patients that are having these lingering symptoms.
I would also too add on to that, because I often get the question, what is a level 3? What is a level 4? The classic comment, or I would say that comes, is, well, if it's a 99.99% recovery rate, why are we still locking things down, and why is everything still so serious? But I want people to think about these numbers. If there's about 330 million people in the United States, but there's less than 1 million hospital beds, okay? If 1% of the population gets sick from COVID, that occupies all of the beds. And let's be honest, there's not even enough for 1% to get sick. That means that 3.3 million people will be getting sick, right? We don't have enough beds to be able to accommodate that amount of people out of 330 million people. So with that being said, we're not talking about individuals that have cancer. We're not talking about individuals that have some sort of lung disease, such as COPD, that needs to go in for recurrent treatment. We're not talking about heart failure. We're not talking about blood pressure. We're not talking about car accidents. We're not talking about fatal shootings. And I'm going to give a personal story, and I won't go long-winded. But literally 3 weeks ago, my brother was shot 7 times and is right now, fighting for his life. But because we are at the level that we are right now dealing with COVID, no visitors. So I ask individuals, here it is, understanding, because we don't want to take these preventative measures, because we don't want to think about ourselves in just a recovery period of COVID. We're not thinking about these other individuals. So the burden is placed on staff. So not only am I having to worry about him getting adequate care, because I know how much stress that they're up under, with families calling all the time, such as myself. They're up under stress because they're short staffed, because they have their colleagues that are out sick. And then it doesn't also address the fact that now in the current climate, before, if you were asymptomatic, you were told to stay home and quarantine. As a healthcare worker, it's such a shortage right now that asymptomatic workers are allowed to work inside of the facilities. And you don't know, even if your grandma comes in because her blood sugars got spiked and she came in to have them controlled, there's no guarantee that she's not going to leave that facility with COVID. And so when I express to people, when they're saying, well, why are we locked down? Why are there stay-at-home orders? The stay-at-home orders has not a lot to do with just the fact that people can be controlled. It more so has to do with the fact that if our healthcare system is overwhelmed, then more people die. Right. And that's exactly what's happening. That means that more people are going to get sick. That means that more people are going to die from diseases, as well as from accidents that they would have otherwise recovered from, because we are not able to keep up with the current quality metrics that are needed in order to be able to care for people safely. And if anyone works in healthcare, they understand right now the dilemma with the PPE. So the fact that for personal protection, I would typically use it. for patients that would have infection. So that's one thing too. JT, is my patient comes in with a blood pressure issue, that doesn't mean that they're not carrying a staph infection. It doesn't mean that they might have like some sort of infection in the urine. That requires me to gown up and glove up and to wash my hands, which again, we'll talk about gloves at a different time. But it requires me to do all of that, even for them just for their regular condition, okay? Now to be told, some facilities are telling nurses, oh, don't use PPE to protect against this infection because we're limited and we need that for COVID. So now you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you're gambling life, and you're gambling with some. And so I always bring this up to people because they really don't have an understanding that it's deeper than just thinking about what this recovery rate will be. I also remind individuals, and this goes into what Alex said, she's right. We're seeing long-term liver effects. We're seeing long-term cardiac issues such as endothelial dysfunction, and that's where individuals are suffering from chronic chest pain. We are seeing liver issues, kidney issues, lung issues. So some individuals that end up with inflammation in their lungs from COVID, it's not coming back in terms of like their lung capacity to where it was before. Now, mind you, we're talking about something that happened about a year ago, okay? So we're still experiencing and still are not fully aware what these long-term effects are. Fertility is another issue. So imagine now the 14-year-old, okay, that isn't getting a COVID vaccine, is typically not exposed to COVID, but she picks it up from her parent. Can you imagine that young lady at the age of 28 that's saying, I can't have kids because I'm exposed to COVID? So these are the things that we're not thinking about. Everybody wants what they want right now. They want it right now. They're urgently about it right now. My story differs from Alex in that while she mentioned she wore the mask to protect herself, one thing many don't know is that with H1N1, with Ebola, with Zika virus, H1N1 required us to do the same nasopharyngeal swab. So it literally goes in your nose and it literally ends up back here in order for us to be able to get an adequate swab. They weren't talking about face masks then. They weren't talking about face shields. So can you imagine how many patients we've had cough in our faces, sneeze in our faces when doing those swabs? And we're thankful because H1N1 was not as bad as what we're experiencing right now out of this particular virus. So with masks, I was actually telling people early on, you only need a mask if you're sick. I'm one of those very people that was saying the exact same thing. But now, because it is so contagious, you have to assume everyone has it, not just people that you think aren't sick. You don't know if you're sick. And honestly, I've seen so much coughing and sneezing. Even a lot of patients still do it. They're coughing and sneezing and they're still not covering up their mouths. Or you got people that's like, oh, that wasn't really a cough. You ever seen somebody do, and I'm like, geez, cover up your mouth. And it's like, that's not really a cough. People will tell you that a sneeze is not really a sneeze. So you have to assume that everybody is contaminated.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So I guess what I'm hearing too of how we're overwhelming our healthcare system, namely these hospitals, is I would liken it to this, and correct me if I heard this wrong, I have to speak in metaphor to make sure I get it and process it. It's almost like when you have kids and you let a kid take this big old bottle of apple juice, my kids, and they're trying to pour it into this little cup. And because they don't know how to pour it nice and gently, it just overwhelms it, and there ends up apple juice everywhere. And it sounds like that's the same thing that's happening with our healthcare. Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, this brings to mind this frustration that people have with our local government officials, our governors, and all the restrictions that they're placing on the general public, and they're restrictive and they hurt, right? We want restaurants and places to be open, but what we don't understand is this very point we just talked about, and that's data that they have, that they do look at and they do talk about. They have X number of beds in the state, X number of beds in each city, in each rural area. Once those beds get filled up, those hospitals get overwhelmed, all of a sudden, all the normal things that always happen, people have heart attacks, strokes, gunshot wounds, knife, etc. All these things are going to continue to happen. There's nowhere to treat them. All of a sudden, we got this snowball effect and things fall apart real quickly. So, they look at that data. They don't want to panic the public, but we, since we're in this type of setting, we need to understand that these are some of the considerations that they have. This is very real. It doesn't take that many patients to overwhelm our system. And the other thing is, when we talk about this novel virus, it's novel, but it's in a family of viruses that we do understand. But there's a lot about this virus that we don't understand. That doesn't mean that the science of how this particular vaccine works is misunderstood. How this works is very understood. We've isolated a protein. Proteins are building blocks. Building blocks are needed for replication and for living. All right. You crush that protein, or you get rid of that protein, you can't live. The virus can't live. That science is proven. It works. So the impact of having coronavirus, short-term and long-term, isn't quite understood. We already see that it's mutating, so it's becoming even more infectious. So they're learning about this virus, but don't get it twisted. They understand how to kill this virus. So this is why it's so important for the education of the general public about, okay, what is this vaccination? Am I injecting myself with the coronavirus or not? And how safe is it, et cetera? We need to come to grips with that, understand what this is, and understand how being a part of this can impact long-term, health of our society.
So I would say, too, I'm starting to see some questions in the chat box, and it's so interesting, JT, because you're scrolling down, but it doesn't allow me to scroll down to see them. But I think it's two questions. There's one from Aaron Michael, and there may be one before that. But because I can't see the Aaron Michael one, I will get back to that one.
I thought up.
Okay, awesome. So even though vaccines are generally safe, what are the potential side effects of the vaccine? Okay, so that's a good question, Aaron. For one, how I explained before with the antibodies. So our body at first needed to be able to recognize coronavirus just in itself, and then using the technology, not coronavirus itself, but using the actual technology to be able to identify it. So there's that first vaccine that's given, and that actually causes the body to be able to recognize it and say, oh, there it is right there. We need to attack that. And then what happens is it starts to actually gathering the army. So it's gathering the army. And then when people end up getting that second dose, it actually says, okay, now we're ready to fight. When you're talking about symptoms itself, this is with flu, this is with anything. The symptoms that you're going to experience, which could be flu-like, it could be cold-like, are attributed to the fact that your body is building up an immune response against that actual virus itself. And in this case, the technology is helping to do so opposed to the virus. Okay, so that's happening there. Now, when you say, what are the potential side effects of the vaccine? I often get questions all the time, am I taking the vaccine? Each of our questions are going to be different because it depends on our bodies. I say that there are absolutely individuals that I do not recommend to take the vaccine. And those are individuals that have what I call a high immunoglobulin E response. These are people with a lot of allergies, okay? Because what happens is how I mentioned, the body builds up this defense system. It does the same thing for, in my opinion, for autoimmune disorders. And I'm saying in my opinion because I know that the body with the autoimmune disorders such as lupus is already waging an attack on the immune system itself. So if this vaccine is to wage an attack on the actual body against those, like to wage an attack against these to build up these antibodies against COVID, then the body can over respond, and it can actually cause an over attack or an overabundance on those individuals, causing their immune system to crash further. So I tell anybody, if you have a lot of allergies, or a sensitivity to allergies, if you have a sensitivity or, like, let's say, an autoimmune disorder, I absolutely do not recommend that you take it. You can go to the Lupus Foundation website. You can go to Foundations on Autoimmune Disorders. They will tell you, in regards to the clinical trials, these individuals were not included as a part of these studies, neither were children. So for me, that is my take on it, is that I do not advise that sensitivity to allergies or autoimmune disorders take the vaccine. Now, I do not trump your doctor or your primary care or whoever you go to get care. So if for whatever reason you still feel like, hey, I have sensitivity to allergies or I have an autoimmune disorder, by all means, speak with them about taking it. But me personally, with us understanding what we know early on and us not having a lot of data to back up the safety among those individuals, I am not recommending it for those individuals.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the questions about the symptoms.
And there was also a question earlier about mask wearing. We'll go ahead and put that up.
Yeah, I saw that one. I liked that one. So I can answer that question and the other question he posed about the mask as well. I can't remember exactly what it said, and then I see that Amanda replied to him with what I was with something that I totally agree with. He asked about the cloth covering and protecting against a microscopic virus and a false sense of security. I think is exactly what he had put on there. And it's just like Amanda had wrote in her reply, that medical facilities, we have special types of masks that we're supposed to wear. And I think some people think that you think that it's only one nurse and one patient and like one mask, when in reality it's not, because taking care of patients requires a team. And there are multiple people that go into patients' rooms. And if you really sit down and look at how many different disciplines go into a patient's room a day, multiple times a day, it can be upwards of over 100 times in just a 12-hour span. And I'm not exaggerating whatsoever, because if you fully have to gown up in total PPE, gown, gloves, and a mask, every time you come in and out of that room, you are supposed to don, so you put on, and every time you leave, you doff, you take it off. And that's just for one time, for one nurse, for one patient. And if you multiply that times like an LPN or a nurse aide or physical therapy or dietary or environmental services or physicians or nurse practitioners or any other specialty that is going to roll up into that room and see that patient, you have to multiply that times every one of those. And plus, a lot of our patients are requiring 2 or 3 people to move them, because that's just where our population has gone to, where we have a larger population, like physically sized, and we need 2, 3, 4 people to do basic care on those patients. And so that's 4 whole outfits right there, multiplied times however many times, like every 2 hours at minimum, that we're needing to go into those patients' rooms. That number multiplied by over, what is like the rate, like 300 some thousand, like it's just astronomical the way the number goes. So having to rationalize our PPE, it's not ideal, and it's like something that really goes against all of our initial nursing school education, because it's like one mask, one person, one time, and you take it off and you put it on. And, it's hard to have to imagine nurses wearing the same gown and the same mask for 12 hours for multiple patients. Like, it's just heartbreaking that is the situation.
It's disgusting.
It's awful.
And I work in infection prevention.
Yeah.
So I work in this area. Yeah. So, and I know exactly what you're saying to be true. And I'm talking about culturing bugs that are associated with the gowns, understanding the transfer of the bugs to and from the gowns. This is the reality of it. And so if you can imagine the situation of being told that you have to wear that same exact gown. Because again, you're still talking about people. You're talking about somebody's child. You're talking about somebody's mother, somebody's father that wants to get back home to their loved ones, but they're faced with having to wear reused PPE. And so something else that I want to address as well is, yes, we do see a lot of masks online. We may see a lot of gowns online, but the one thing that I can say is everything is not medical grade. And of the materials that are being offered, are they putting us further at risk? You still have to remember that COVID lives on plastic for up to 3 days. And so if we're talking about plastic gowns, okay, and the reuse of them, are we now talking about potential droplets that are staying on there for an exorbitant amount of time? So then when we throw that factor in there, as well as the fact that other people, not just the individuals that, as she mentioned, are coming into the room, okay, because we're talking about that, but we're also talking about individuals that have to handle the trash. We're talking about a whole process in terms of where this stuff to go. We're talking about surfaces that can potentially become contaminated. So we're talking about a lot of things that are required. And when this happened, there was a lot of knockoff companies that were making masks, saying that they made gloves, saying that they made PPE gowns. And honestly, something as simple as not having the loops around the fingers to be able to put the glove on. A company telling us that they're gowns, but they only stop where our shirts at, means that our potentially get contaminated in between. And then if that's not properly washed, then what happens to the next patient when you're rushing and there's already a shortage? And so it's a complicated problem. And while I understand, you know, for most, it's why mask, why mask, why mask. The interesting thing is when this first happened, they were all flying off the shelves, which is crazy to me because they were all flying off the shelves. But it's now that people are being required to wear them, it's now there's this rebellion wearing them.
Yeah.
And then I also,
one thing about,
go ahead, Jean.
You know, so one thing about, you know, wearing masks, you know, people think, well, and I think maybe someone made this comment, well, you know, how does a mask stop this microscopic, you know, virus? And I think it's important to understand that a mask is not fail safe. A mask is not going to protect us 100%, and it's not going to protect those around us 100%. You know, that no one's ever said that that is the goal or that is what's going to happen. But it does help along with other precautions that we can take. Social distancing and not being in an enclosed environment for extended periods of time, usually over 15 minutes. So time plus exposure increases your chance of getting this vaccine. So if you can if one person has a mask, that's good. If two people have a mask, that's even better, but it's still not 100%, but it's better. It's way better than not having it. Right. So, you know, I think that's what we need to realize is how do you decrease your exposure? Wear a mask, social distance, get in and get out of the place that you're going.
And then to speak to, I saw a question about the high rate of nurses or people that work in the hospital that are getting infected with COVID. And you have to think about how we talk about social distancing and stay 6 feet and wear your mask. Well, in the hospital as a healthcare professional, we don't have the luxury of saying, well, I'm going to stay 6 feet away from you while I perform all of this personal care on you and while I try to start an IV and while I try to do all of these things to you. We are, and I'll be so blunt, like we are up in people's faces. We are in parts of their bodies. Like we are close to patients. And so like with those patients that are intubated and have the tubes down their throats. I mean, there's things that we have to do with those tubes. We are still close to all parts of the body. And we are there for extended periods of time. So we try to tell other people so we can help everybody else. Stay 6 feet apart from people, socially distance yourself, and try not to spend so much time together, because that time and the close proximity, that is what increases your chances of contracting it. And unfortunately, healthcare workers, we don't have that luxury of deciding I'm going to stay 6 feet away from you and I'm only going to spend such a couple minutes with you. We don't, because that goes against everything that, we're taught and that we do as part of our profession and taking care of people.
Well, I have a question then, and perhaps someone watching might feel me on this one. The information I'm getting from you all, in some circumstances, some could say is novel. So my question is, where was this cascading and sharing of information from day one? Because unless I missed something, at first it said you don't have to wear a mask, then it's wear a mask, and then it was, oh, you can just take a t-shirt and roll it up, and there you go. And that made it kind of trivial. And then it was like, no, if you can get N95, get N95. Then no, don't get N95 because the nurses need that. And it's like, okay, well, what happened? Where was the ball dropped on that?
So a couple things. And I've got to respond to this because like I see a comment from the audience member, and I think that this is very relevant. Communication is key. And one of the things that I can absolutely say that I agree with this gentleman on that made this comment is in regards to cloth masks and cloth masks not being PPE. You can actually go on the CDC's website and find that a cloth mask is not PPE. Mm-hmm. There are certain differences in terms of the type of fabric that is needed, okay, in order for you to protect against the particles that can come through that mask, okay? And so it's not necessarily that it's meant to catch everything. It's meant to catch some things. So it is not 100% protective. It is not going to be to the same caliber of medical masks. But one thing that we cannot ignore is this. These droplets stay suspended in the air. Mm-hmm. Hand hygiene, less than 5% of people clean their hands correctly. Most people don't understand what social distancing is and what the exceptions are, quote unquote. Because, like, let's be honest, people think taking a selfie, of a group of people is fine for a second, and that's still considered social distancing. You still have the issue of, let's talk about mask wearing, okay? So you have to wear masks correctly. And when I say wear masks correctly, you're literally talking about a group of individuals right now, some that are saying, well, they got us wearing all of these masks and the numbers haven't gone down. What's happening? Alex will tell you that anytime that we wear masks, and luckily I'm going to say, yep, I actually have one. Okay. I'm going to go through you got one too. So I'm going to go through this real quick tutorial about some of the stuff that I'm seeing, okay? So for one, people putting a mask on like this, okay? If your hands are not clean and they're dirty, mm-hmm. you're essentially transferring every single germ that you have from your hands, okay, directly to the mask while you're putting it on. That's why mm-hmm. they say you're supposed to wash your hands first before you apply it. So then let's say people put it on. So they do this to the bridge of the nose. They got it over the ears, right? So it's there perfectly. I'm seeing people do this. They're actively touching it. They like, oh, I need to have my nose breathe, this, that, and the other. This is not proper wear. I'm also seeing this. People think they're supposed to eat and then this. What they don't realize is the droplets that are on your exposed neck when I'm dialoguing between us two, those droplets are now down on my neck. And so when I pull it down, I've now transferred those droplets from the inside of my mask directly up to my eyes, mouth, and nose. And COVID only transfers through eyes, mouth, and nose. Understand that when I talk, you see how the mask is moving down? People are supposed to take it from the ears and put it where it needs to go, not adjusting it directly from the front with your hands that other droplets from other people have touched. So now when they're taking their mask off just like this, or they're touching it with their hands, they're not accounting for that. They're also not accounting for the fact that here it is, your cell phone is your third hand. So if I'm touching my phone and I'm putting my phone up to my face and I'm putting it up to my mask, I'm taking all those germs and I'm trying to get in between. Mm-hmm. So while this is a situation where it's blame, we can blame leadership of the country for not having very good communication. This comes down to them not providing individuals with tools to hold them accountable in the manner in which they need to be. We are all people. We are all not just tests. We are all not just numbers. It was so much emphasis placed on test, test, test. Tests tell you if you got it. What happens to the measures that need to be put in place to make sure that you're not even going to have to get tested because you're preventing it? If only 5% of people cleaning their hands correctly, where is the mass education at about people cleaning their hands? The other piece of it is when you're talking about mask wearing, it didn't come down to laundering. So it was all of this makeshift stuff about, oh, this is how you make a mask and this is how you wear it. But there was no conversation about laundering. There was no conversation about people with dermatology issues that may, need to wash it with a special soap in order for them to not have breakouts. It didn't address people with breathing issues. And when I say breathing issues, 9 times out of 10, individuals that have asthma also have anxiety. Like the two typically go together. And so it is definitely an issue of where they have failed us public health wise in terms of making sure that the public could do what it is we need to do. And this is also a time of where everything came out in privilege. And when I say privilege, don't tell everybody to wear a mask, but you're not willing to make sure that every individual has a mask and they have the appropriate number of masks to be able to wear. You put a health mandate out here. And again, this is where privilege comes in because there's individuals that could not afford it. There's individuals that may have not had the resources to be able to launder it. And so my issue that I have is why did that not happen? And so I feel like they failed us on multiple levels in not making sure that we understood the fundamentals. Hand washing typically gets ignored as not being important when we know COVID transfers eyes, mouth, and nose. Proper mask wearing. And then again, when I talk about privilege, it is ignoring the fact that people cannot sit at home. Everybody can't sit at home. Everybody doesn't have the luxury of a job to sit at home. Everybody doesn't have the luxury of, not of having family. There are a lot of individuals that do not have blood family members where their friends are their families. And so when you put all of these restrictions on people, instead of showing them how to live safely, we are putting a Band-Aid over a losing wound, waiting for it to burst again, and then continue to keep placing Band-Aids, opposed to getting to the root of the problem and seeing what is the source of infection. COVID is not going to be the first. It's not going to be the last. It wasn't the first. So until we show individuals that you are more than just numbers, you more than just tests, and we actively need to make sure that you're practicing these preventative measures, we need to make sure restaurants and businesses are doing the same thing. So they failed us there too. Meaning, let's be honest, ketchup and mustard should have never been sitting on the table, even pre-pandemic. Just think about it. You sitting up there with your menu, they got their plastic menus, right? You done went to the restaurant and washed your hands, you done ordered your food, and you got their menu in their hand, they ain't been wiping down. And then you ain't washed your hands again. You got your hands on the ketchup and mustard that at least 500 people that day that came to the same restaurant touched. You pour it onto your French fries, and then you grabbing your French fries and eating it by hands. So this is a thing. I bet you it's still people that got like the little condiments. People still having those nasty plastic containers being placed directly on their food. You don't know if that condiment was on the floor. You don't know before it made it directly on your food. And so until we get to that point of having a raised level of consciousness that we all need to do our part, there's going to continue to be this blame thing. And it starts with one person at a time of educating another person at a time. And so I hear you, JT, when you say they didn't explain this. I wholeheartedly agree. And this is the issue that we have. And somebody mentioned that the days of buffets are over. Yeah, because think about that. Everybody's going down the assembly line and touching the same spoon, and then they sit down and eat.
So you said something that was so good. And I guess if there's any place I can put in and interject, it's probably in my responsibility here. If I listen to all of us, the collective social responsibility, because it's a public health crisis, right? Now, for Christians, and if you're not a Christian or faith adherent, then the shoe doesn't. You can't wear the shoe. But I am a pastor, and I confess, in the beginning of the pandemic, I was not a mask wearer because I was saying I'm not going to give in to fear. I'm not going to subscribe to fear. I have to demonstrate my faith. I have to show God that I believe in Him, and show the community that I'm confident that God will cover me. COVID's still here, and it was my mother who always gets me together. She said, "Hey, you're a pastor now. You should wear the mask." I'm like, "Well, but I'm showing them a better way, right?" She said, "No, you should wear the mask. People look at you, they see you. You are a role model. You are a public figure." And then I got to thinking about it, and the Holy Spirit dealt with me. And I had to weigh these two things. What's more important? The exercise of my personal rights, agenda, and faith, or to serve the community, to serve someone? Is it more important for me to, I guess, relish in not wearing a mask because I don't have to? Or perhaps the more important thing is that me, by wearing a mask, what if it puts someone who's deathly afraid, someone who's anxious, someone who has a compromised immune system, but doesn't have anyone to go out in public for them? What if me wearing that mask, even if I don't believe they work, provides them a measure of peace? Is that not more important than the exercise of my own rights? And that's where I want to push Christians. And I want to push them here too, and then I'll yield the mic again. And I'm not going to say who, but if the shoe fits, wear it. How are you pro-choice when it comes to elections and the candidates you vote for? Right? I mean, pro-life, and your arguments down about it's murder and it's this, and let people live and the right for life. You argue me down on that, pro-life. But then wearing masks is a choice. So which lives are you pro for? Because they have demonstrated, they have told you that mask wearing does help this crisis. So how can this be an option or a choice if you say you are pro-life? I have a hard time with that. And I think, quite frankly, I find it to be hypocritical. And we have to do better. People of faith, we have to do better.
You know,
So
one thing.
Go ahead, Gene. Go ahead.
Well, you know, one thing I won't touch that. I'll leave that to you, Pastor. But on the wider issue of our people in our society, and the risk that we are under, and this is, I don't want to kind of get into fearing everything, every bacteria, every virus out there, because to a certain extent we do want to build up some immunity, but some of these viruses and some of these bacteria are absolutely deadly. You just don't want to get them. But on top of that, we got to understand that we do have a lot of immune disorders in our community. We have a lot of diabetes. We have a lot of asthma. We have a lot of obesity. We have a lot of underlying disease that double and triple our risk of morbidity and mortality if we get this particular virus and others, including H flu. So there's an underlying bigger health issue here that, as we're talking about being, educating ourselves on better, sanitation, hygiene, whatever, we also need to take a look at ourselves and say, okay, what else can I do, not just for today, but moving forward, because like we said, this is not going to be the last virus that hits us. Okay. So, as the world has become smaller and people are traveling around the world more, these types of things can kick off like that. And so you got to really think, what can I do to help strengthen my immune system, strengthen my body so that I'm better capable? And there's no guarantee, even healthy people get this virus and can die from it. But at least you're better capable. You don't have as much of the extenuating circumstances that make these particular issues even worse.
So, Gene, what's interesting too?
Yeah.
What is healthy? And so that's the thing that many of the Black community, minority communities really fail at. 9 times out of 10, we don't have a primary care provider. We don't go get checkups. We attribute health to being a certain size, okay, and not necessarily what's going on the inside. And I always use the analogy of you can have a candy red paint Cadillac on the outside and a 400,000-mile engine on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, I understand people's concerns when they're like, oh my gosh, this vaccine, I'm looking at this vaccine, or I'm looking at this. We are so accustomed, and it's just the way society does it, to where we expect everybody else to be the CEO of our problems, and we expect other people to be the CEO of our health. And that means, for example, like I was expressing, you know, in other conversations, people are not questioning what's in their food. So you won't question the formaldehyde that's in the fast food fries that's slowly killing you, but you may choose to not take a vaccine that could potentially save your life. The other thing is, too, many people don't think about the fact that the animals that they're eating get vaccinated regularly. Meat gets spray-on viruses. So the FDA approved this.
Say that one more time. The animals we eat get vaccinated regularly. Woo!
That is correct. They have vaccination schedules. Like, there's not a Department of Agriculture for no reason. There's not, you know, a FDA for any reason. And I'm telling you that they get vaccines, okay? But then they get antibiotics. They get medicines. Also, and I just mentioned before, spray on viruses on the meat, on certain types of meat. And this has been going on since 2006. Recently, it was last week, they're genetically modifying a pig to remove the alga, which is causing, you know, allergy issues and sugar issues. And so I bring that up because I understand that there's such an emphasis on what it is that's going right now. And many are not even realizing this same technology that people are concerned about being, you know, in humans, the meat that you're eating has likely already been exposed to it to be able to address some of the issues. And so, and this is what happens when we're talking about years and years and years of studying that happens, meaning that we just don't show up and just say, hey, this is science and this is legitimate. Time goes into this the same way, you know, JT, theology is your thing, you know, Alex, nurse education, being a nurse practitioner, holistic, you know, treatment, that's your thing. Your role, Jean, in the pharmaceutical industry, mine's in infection prevention and research. This doesn't just happen overnight. So I can't come to JT and say, you know what, I heard about this new process in theology and I know I'm an expert in it when this is something he's been studying. I may be able to offer him a different perspective on it, but we have to stop. We have to do better about not criticizing our kinfolks about what it is they do in their professions and about what it is they're recommending or may not be recommending. I'll give anybody the good, bad, and the ugly about a situation, but the one thing that I'm not going to do, my job is to inform you, not conform to you. So my views may not match an individual's views, but it's going to come from the heart and it's going to come from the science, which is most important. And if I don't know, then I'm going to say that I don't know, and we still have work to do in this area. Jean brought up something too that was essential in that, and Alex even brought it up earlier. I can't tell someone take the vaccine or don't take the vaccine, but what I will tell them is this: you have to weigh your options. And when I say weigh your options, do not take them lightly. Are you an individual that can live with an amputated leg because you got a clot? Can you live with the possibility of having a stroke because you got a clot? Do you want to be on dialysis at the age of 30 or 40 or a little bit later? It may be on literally dialysis when you set to retire because you got it in your 30s or 40s, and now here it is. You worked this hard and you're thinking you're getting ready to live the good life, and this is the mesothelioma of 2030. Because that's the thing that people really don't realize. It wasn't until years later that we found HPV attached to brain cancer for men and cervical cancer for women. Zika virus attached to neurological issues. This wasn't found out for years. H1N1, fertility issues. And so I bring this up to say, like, when you think about it, what are you doing and who are you protecting? If you're going at it from the standpoint of, I don't want to be vaccinated. This goes against, my religious beliefs. It goes against everything. And I say to you, if you want to gamble and that's your gamble, let that be your gamble. But don't let it be because you're thinking to yourself, oh, you know what? I'm just not going to get it because I don't want anything to just happen to me. It's not just about you. It's also about others that are around you that cannot take it. As we're continuing to learn, whether it's autoimmune disorders, whether it's other conditions out there that cannot take the vaccine, when some individuals take the vaccine, it will be taking the vaccine for those that cannot take it. Children cannot take it. So imagine you being an essential worker, being around your children, having coronavirus go through your household, and now you're on the verge of when they're in their 20s and 30s and they're saying, Mom, I can't have kids. And you realizing that those decisions that you made early on, you could have helped prevent it. And so again, it's not a situation of telling people what to do. It's just informing them that they should make an educated decision to weigh their options. If you know you're not practicing infection prevention like you should, being honest, if you're not clean, if you're not doing hand hygiene, if you're not socially distancing, if you're not, washing your hands, if you're not wearing masks, if you're not cleaning your cell phones, if you're not conscious about where you're eating, if you're not conscious about what you're eating, if you working out, if you can legitimately say that you're not doing all of the lifestyle habits to keep yourself or lower your chances of recovery, it's still no guarantee that you won't suffer long-term effects that's associated with it. And so it's not a cry for people to take it. It's just them to understand this is where the technology is. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I say, when we think about chickenpox, right? So I remember my grandparents and parents, they were doing the oatmeal baths. That was all they had. And guess what? People were dying from chickenpox. Okay. Then when my parents came around, they at least had the luxury of getting the oatmeal baths. Okay. So their grandparents ain't had oatmeal baths. They did oatmeal baths. Then they started making soothers. When my generation was around, it was, oh, we're going to just throw a chickenpox party because we know that this thing is so contagious. Everybody is going to get it. Everybody brought their kids out in the street. And guess what? We all got chickenpox at the same time. Had scarring on our bodies, all of that other stuff. Our kids don't have to worry about getting chickenpox because there is a vaccine. I encourage any individual. So not only look up that, look at the deaths of polio before it happened. I also want you to look up smallpox. Look up smallpox. Smallpox still make me itch every time I look at it because I cannot imagine smallpox being something that we would have to deal with in the current climate as being a pandemic. And so vaccines are not all bad. They've gotten us to where we are right now, but many people have to remove ourselves out of the way and realizing that science is not perfect. Food science, so our food is not perfect in terms of what it is we're consuming. You can have a vitamin and still have maltodextrin, which is going to make you gain weight, but you're thinking that you're only taking it for vitamin D. So I always say, we definitely have to do a better job about watching ourselves and being the CEO of our health and stop blaming everybody else for what it is our bodies are doing, including our healthcare professionals.
That's good. Well, as you all see, we have a question from my aunt, who's also in the faith as well. Dr. Pamela Harrison went to the same seminary. For a person who has diabetes and psoriasis, are these conditions considered autoimmune diseases when considering the vaccine?
I know I've been talking a lot, so you tell me, Alex, if you want it, or I'll take it.
Well, I mean, I can take it. I guess from my perspective, I don't feel comfortable, right, telling somebody whether or not to take a vaccine or not take a vaccine, right? It's your body, it's your choice ultimately, and that's what healthcare has really been all about is, it's your personal choice whether you choose to do something or not. And what I would say is, think about how severe your psoriasis is or how severe your diabetes is. And think about if you're going to get this vaccine, because with all vaccines, there is the risk of having some type of allergic reaction to it. No lie, because you're putting something into your body that's not in there already. And so there is a chance for an allergic reaction. So, you just really have to think about how your current state of health and how you're doing, and going back to how are you taking care of yourself in general, and how do you think you might react to this. And then I would say just refer back to your primary care doctor and really discuss it with them, who knows your health history. Or if you don't have a primary care physician, seek professional assistance, from a physician who can really guide you and make an educated decision based on your whole health history. It's hard to just go by, just one or two diagnoses or anything else. So that's really what I would advise in that situation.
I would also,
go ahead, doctor.
so the other thing that I'm gonna say is this. Right now, there's a potential strain, okay, that we know, well, not a potential strain because it's in the UK and it's responsible for a numerous amount of infections over there. And there is a lot of belief that that actual strain has made it over here to the United States. Mm-hmm. It is still being studied whether or not the COVID vaccine even covers that particular strain in itself. And so with that being said, the one thing that I always tell people is just like how we change as people, meaning like the person that I am today is not the person I was last month, not last year, not 5 years ago. We all change. Viruses, bacteria, and fungus is not sitting around like, oh, I guess we just gonna stay old and just, not do anything. These things evolve, they mutate, they continue to move and move and move, which is why, yes, there is a flu vaccine every single year. There's a flu vaccine every single year for that very reason, in that these particular strains will continue to mutate. You have to remember the food that's genetically modified, you're eating that stuff. Every time you eat that stuff, it's constantly changing your microbiome, okay? So that's changing your actual makeup. It's changing who you are. So that's changing. And as you continue to encounter bugs, that's another change. So these strains, the one that we saw over in Wuhan was not the same one in Malaysia, not in Europe. The one that we saw even on the West Coast of the United States isn't the same one that's in the Midwest. And so we have to realize that science is not perfect. That's why there's years and years and years of discovery. But it's to understand right now, if you had access to something that could potentially help you to build up resistance to not just this strain or something in the future when we don't know what's coming. Because right now we're doing this in real time. Like everything is happening in real time. This is honestly, how many times have all of us worked in a profession where they can do all of the mock trainings they want to? They can do all of the mock scenarios. You can actually, Pastor Harrison decide like, you know what, I'm going to practice I'm getting ready to practice what I'm getting ready to speak to the congregation about. But you might get in there and the Lord decide to move you in another direction. And what you practiced was not actually what happened. It's the same exact thing that we are encountering when we might have practiced for a pandemic. We might have did all of this prep work for a pandemic. But then when you had a pandemic, it's not really what you encountered. That's what's happening as we're learning about the vaccine. That's what's happening as we're learning about preventative stuff. Again, everybody is expecting for it to be perfect and for everyone to have the answers. My thing is this: when you realize that something is working, you stick with that until you figure out something else that's going to also keep you safe. For me, my go-to right now has been lemon ginger. I will continue to make sure that my family gets regular lemon ginger. I juice every single week. I make sure that they get dosed up with it very nicely so that way we can do a vitamin C boost. Because again, my husband is essential and he's out there constantly. It's not telling people to get a vaccine or not. If you are immunocompromised, such as diabetes, psoriasis, like if you have a system where you cannot fight off bugs, meaning for COVID-19 increases the risk of people with diabetes, and having diabetes increases your risk of getting COVID-19. And so in that situation, I would advise that you speak with your primary care provider to see what it is you can potentially do to make sure that you're staying safe. I would ask your doctor, where are the studies at that I can find to show that people with diabetes that has my same ethnicity took this particular dose of this vaccine? So that way I'll know whether or not this is potentially safe for me and if I want to take that gamble in order to be able to take it. Because some of us with our health conditions have no choice but to take it. And that's being honest. Some people have no choice but to take it because they realize that if they get exposed, and literally they're fighting death.
You know, wouldn't it? Let me ask this question. You know, as you're, because we in our world, in pharmaceutical world, we talk a lot about, you know, the actual benefit of vaccinations to these various populations like diabetics, et cetera. I'm a person living with diabetes. I absolutely personally plan on getting this vaccination, but it's is it more understanding your potential for a hyper allergic response? So if you have had a history of hyperallergic response to other types of shots, other vaccinations, this is probably not something that you want to do, or at the very least, make sure that you're having a very, you know, good, comprehensive conversation with your healthcare provider. That's kind of what I'm hearing a lot of is what's your history, and then certainly if you get that first, you know, dose and you have a severe, you know, allergic response, you're probably not going to take the second dose. So that's kind of what I'm hearing more. I know in our world we do, you know, speak of the, you know, the potential benefit of a vaccination to these populations, you know, that are diabetic or asthma, et cetera. So, you know, to your point, I don't know yet if we have parsed out data or if that's generally available to the public. It might be, but you know, definitely don't hear this and think, oh, I got diabetes, I'm not going to take this. No, it's more, what's your history of hyperallergic type responses to various medications or injections?
Yes, so I agree with that.
What goes into my thinking too is Dr. Knight, he made this point. He had a dress rehearsal last night. Was not more than, and I want to push us, especially the faith community, to think not about me. No, 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 no. In the true spirit of Christ, me comes second. The community, the well-being. A South African philosophy, Ubuntu, right? I am because you are, right? We have to adopt that. So thinking along the lines of not so much how do I feel and what matters to me, but who's depending on me.
Mhm.
I have a tough time if I transmit this virus, even unintentionally, to someone who's going to have a hard time replacing my income. You know, my wife, if I pass away because I succumb to it. So I also would liken to this, and when I spoke to Gene about this, and then I got a big question coming at you after this. You know, again, putting in metaphors to understand. We're in the game of COVID right now, right? And it might not look like it, but I used to play basketball, and I was kind of okay at it. I was decent. And one thing I remember, if the defense, if they're playing zone defense, right, and if you can't break that zone, one of the best ways to shut down the zone was to like start hitting them that jumper. And if you start hitting them shots, they're gonna come out that zone and go back to man because they don't want you shooting. And the way to break down man to man is have good moves, ball rotation, ball movement, and slash and cut and pick and roll can answer most problems. What I'm saying is this: when you're faced with some sort of opposition, don't just wait and sit there and let them win. You have to make adjustments. You know, we're in the first half, you know, metaphorically speaking, of COVID-19. It's going to make adjustments at halftime. It made adjustments during the summer. It's making adjustments now.
Mhm.
So I can't afford to just wait for it to make its next move. I need to adjust with it. Now, if it gets worse or wherever it goes, we'll make those adjustments when they have to get back and just hope. And we should hope. We must be proactive. Along those lines, how can I trust the vaccine coming from these big pharmaceutical industries and you're in the industry? Because don't they just want to make money? We all want to make money, right? And they want to make billions and keep making billions. So how do I know that Pfizer, for example, cares about me and I'm not just a dollar sign guinea pig to take this vaccine? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, that is a very good question, and it's a question that a lot of people have asked and will continue to ask. Um, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing for a company to want to be profitable, right? If you look at our healthcare system, it's built on people getting sick, not staying healthy. I remember going to the Joslin Diabetes Center for some lectures and some training around diabetes. And Joslin Diabetes Center is like a preeminent diabetes and insulin center in the world in Boston. And I remember walking around Boston, and if you've never been there, it's beautiful. And you got Harvard there, you got all these medical schools, this massive medical complex. And I remember walking around like, wow, how many people does this complex employ? Here we are talking about diabetes and ways that we can treat it and prevent it and stuff. And, but when you look around, it's like, we got the largest employer is the healthcare system. Nothing wrong with that, but our system is basically around people getting sick. So, do we trust doctors? Do we trust hospitals? Doctors and hospitals use medications to help treat, so it's kind of, the pharmaceutical industry is as a part of the healthcare industry. Are there bad players in the industry? Absolutely. You hear these stories where these companies, they'll come in and they'll buy a product and they'll raise it 5,000%, the cost. Now there's a lot of different legislation in place now that will hopefully prevent a lot of that happening. And a lot of companies do provide a lot of assistance for prescriptions. So there's a lot of the behind the scenes about prescriptions that people don't understand. They hear the headlines, right? And I'm not going to get into all that. But the point about should we trust? Absolutely, we should trust. But we should trust the science once we understand the science and who has looked at the science. So without getting into all the different types of studies, what we know for our purposes today on this vaccine, we know the trials that they've been open book from jump to start to finish. So a lot of eyes are on these results. A lot of eyes were on the trial design. So these would normally be peer reviewed, or they're peer reviewed. People have looked at the trials. They said these are well-designed trials. They've looked at the data and says, okay, you have enough. You got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of patients. You have enough to say, hey, is this statistically significant? These studies were designed appropriately, were validated, were looked at, were combed over. So, the chances of a pharmaceutical company, a bad player per se, hiding some type of result is slim to none, as far as studies go. And so I think we can feel very, very confident on the data behind this particular issue in these vaccines coming through.
JT, I want to add to that, and I know we're getting ready to wrap up too, is the fact, and I know I mentioned this early on, unlike different times, taxpayer dollars are skin in the game. Okay. So that's the biggest difference right now, meaning that literally our taxpayer dollars that typically go towards the National Institutes of Health and funding agencies that will be studying this separately. So typically it's siloed. So you got industry that's doing their thing, and you got, scientists that are getting government funding that are doing their own. In this particular instance, we're talking about them collaborating. So just as we're talking about academia, all of these different entities coming together to be able to produce it. And so when someone asks, well, why now? This is the boy that cried wolf. So I wholeheartedly agree. People have been messed over so much when it then came to big pharma, prices not really matching what it is that people need. This is the time where individuals or these companies, if they took government funding, they had to play government rules. And that meant taking care of people. Okay. And so things are different, but I understand people's reluctance given our history with medications, given our history, with vaccines, given our history with unethical trials, I have to just say, when we're talking about Black scientists such as, is Mika Corbett that is there studying the actual vaccine and helping to develop it itself. And she's actually saying this time is different. And we're looking to where we evolve into as a people, where we can actually say that we have Black people that are in high level positions in big pharma, that are clinical nurse scientists, and minorities, period, that are taking on these positions and being able to actually change the narrative of things. It is very disheartening at times when you're actually telling people, that there are people and players at the table making sure that things are going right, opposed to people having this reluctance of, oh, that person crossed over, or, oh, that person, that's my skin folk, that's not my kin folk. And so we have to sometimes get out of our own way and say, really, what other solutions do we have, or do we have a better solution? And that's what concerns me, is I don't think that we have a better solution when it comes to us facing these current times. And when we do our history on the bubonic plague, when we look at our history in regards to the great pandemics or infections that have killed people, it's come down to one concept, and unfortunately, it's selfishness. Selfishness is killing us.
Wow, man! You know what? That is the time is now 8:30. Clearly, we've scratched the surface on the conversation. Real quickly, I want to do this. I'm going to hit our takeaways, and I promise you, I'll be brief. I'll do this in 30 seconds. Final thoughts of departure from our panel, and then we'll say goodbye because we don't want to hold you hostage all Tuesday night. Number one, COVID is here. It's here, and it's going to be here for a while. Deal with it. No, but really, it's here. And we can believe the miracle. We can blow on it. He's still here. COVID has short and long-term effects, right? Now, we don't know the long-term effects yet because it hasn't been here long-term. Okay, that's just, come on. 3, a takeaway, the principles of vaccines, how they're developed, the history of them, the efficacy, and how we have advancements in technology. And really the big one is how they're not putting the virus in you. They're just taking the protein. It's almost like if you've traveled or applied for a job, hey, send me your license, send me your passport. They don't have the actual physical passport in their hand. They have a picture of it. But that picture gives them all the information they need, right? This is how I've come to understand how mRNA, ribonucleic acid, for the flex, how it works, right? So, so we would have to understand that they're not making you sick. It's just the building block. Another one, COVID is different from cancer because, how's there a vaccine? How's there a vaccine for COVID, but not one for cancer or the flu or for the common cold? Completely different things. And maybe we can talk about it at the next time. Completely different things. Another one. There are people who have dedicated their entire life to studying this. Life, degrees, experience. Who are we to Google the word COVID-19 or vaccine? We go to the 5th or 6th article because the first one, that wouldn't be good research, right? So we go to the 5th or 6th one. On the first page of 5,000 responses. And now you know about COVID more than the panel. Okay. Next, faith versus facts, right? I think my father said it, the facts are, the reality is, but the facts are, or something like that. How do we wrestle the two, right? And maybe the response is so much like, God, take away COVID. Lord, change this situation. The Lord, change me. Help me last way, not selfish. Help me to consider someone else. As Paul lifted up in that Christ hymn in Philippians chapter 2, he let this mind be in you that was also in Christ, to be selfless, to be so concerned about others that you empty yourself. That's where we got to get to right now. All right. So those are our takeaways. I felt like preaching a little bit. I think I did. All right. Final thoughts from our panelists, and we'll wrap it up for the night.
Who's going first?
Ladies first.
Okay. So one thing too that my final thoughts are is to definitely make sure that you are taking into consideration your own health and the risk versus reward. And as we talked about, and you know, JC, you said it, who's depending on you is a great question. And I also have to bring this up just really quickly because I thought it was so profound when you mentioned the lack of not taking treatment, the lack of not wanting to wear a mask, the lack of not practicing hand hygiene, the lack of social distancing, even as a believer. The question does come, and you said this, is someone testing God? Are you testing God when you're not doing those behaviors? So are you testing science? Remember, everything that we are doing right now in our professions, our existence is because of that belief, you know? And so when you're questioning, should I clean my hands, even though here it is, you're given the resources to be able to do it? Should I wear masks? The question comes is, are you gambling? So are you gambling with your life in this regard? And even though you're saying to yourself, I have faith in God, are you testing your faith in God through the use of not taking these measures that are widespread, that continue to be given to you? Some of us having family members that are, you know, impacted by COVID-19. Some of us didn't wake up next to relatives, you know, because of this, because of related or unrelated, because maybe they were hospitalized for something else and they didn't get appropriate treatment, or they couldn't get to the hospital quick enough or get it quick enough. And so I always just bring up prevention is better than treatment. That is my motto, meaning how do you prevent something? And that means, long story short, would you rather prevent a gunshot or treat the wound?
Huh.
So my takeaway that I saw a lot of comments about too was about, you know, that I'm responsible for me. I take care of mine and me, and that's it. And that kind of thinking, that kind of mentality, once you are part of a community, and unless you're living on an island by yourself, everything that you do directly impacts other people, and everything that other people do directly impacts you. And that's part of being in a community, and that's the whole like basis of public health, is the health of the public, because we all impact and influence one another. And you know, people saying that, you know, it's not my responsibility to worry about other people, I don't have to. Well, there were people that didn't have to worry about the quality of water, or having clean drinking water, or sanitation, lots of these other public health things that we enjoy, right? But people had to care because it affected other people, it affected the community, affected the public. So we had to do something about it. COVID is the same thing. It's a virus that's here, that's within the community. It's affecting everybody, and we all have to work together to overcome it. So that's my biggest takeaway, is you're not really protecting, you know, yourself unless you're really protecting the whole community.
Yeah. You know, I'll speak from an industry standpoint, and I believe I mentioned this earlier. You know, the pharmaceutical industry is a part of the overall healthcare system, right? And over history has played an integral role of helping to eradicate, you know, massive, you know, diseases that have plagued the world. So, you know, there's good and bad in everything, you know, but you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, the pharmaceutical industry is a part. There are regulations in place to make sure that you know, that the companies are playing fairly and are playing by the right rules. You know, at the end of the day, you know, there are medicines that are created that have a lot of science behind them that save lives every day. You know, do you want to be on 20 medicines by the time you're 60? Absolutely not. But that's what's happening with people. And you know why it's happening? Because people are putting any kind of thing into their bodies. Food, what we drink, etc., are just poisoning our bodies, and we're counting on pharmaceuticals to fix things. And it's really, pharmaceuticals companies are going to make medicines to treat all these, so-called diseases and illnesses. But at the end of the day, there's a lot that we can do to not be on all these medications. But that doesn't say that the medications aren't effective, and certainly effective when needed. This is a time when there is a need for a vaccination and it's not just in the United States. We need multiple companies to manufacture vaccines because they need to get across the world. It doesn't do any good for just the United States to be vaccinated and not the world. So we got to vaccinate the whole world. So all these pharmaceutical companies have a hand in that, a big hand in making sure that we make these vaccinations readily available and affordable across the world as well. So I'll speak to that and I'll keep it at that, and I'll leave it there.
Wow. Amazing. We're going to squeeze in our last two questions and concerns. These will be the last two, which really, the one, and this is my sister's, Ree Parker, which will, I'll speak more of that in a second, but we'll let Dr. Knighton touch that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Mm-hmm. So two things, and I got to do the one that's before this. So for the gentleman that continues to say that he believes in faith but doesn't believe in cloth, I'm going to go back to a simple lesson of just science. When we put a paper towel on the counter, what does it do? It absorbs fluid. If you put a cloth t-shirt on top of a counter, a wet counter, it absorbs fluid. When the droplets come from your mouth and they are what can be the air and stay suspended in the air, caught, and it is absorbed by that cloth. So when we have this belief that cloth does not perform any sort of efficacy against germs, that is completely false. It may not be 100%, but it does provide protection. Mm-hmm. To the other question about racism, which is an underlying issue in this country, I will tell you right now, you're not the only one that's scared. I will be honest. There is hesitancy on my behalf. Alex has expressed that as well. You know, this is not something that I'm sitting up here like, oh yeah, I'm getting ready to be the first one lined up. But when I think about potentially me wanting to be a grandparent one day, when I'm thinking about potentially the fact that I want my kids to grow up and thrive, and I don't want to be taking my kids to a dialysis appointment, so that might mean me protecting myself in order to protect them. It gives me a lot of things to be able to weigh. When we talk about syphilis, and I'm talking about the Tuskegee trials, when we're talking about the Henrietta Lacks, when we're talking about all of these things, you know, that have traditionally happened bad to Black people, we cannot ignore them. We cannot dismiss them. And how I mentioned before, this is a situation of the boy that cried wolf. They actually put thought into this process. They actually made it something that was going to be equitable, whether that was testing it on the Black mice. And if anybody has ever heard me talk about this, I used to get offended when somebody told me that a drug was safe for me, but you tested it on a white mouse with blue eyes. That's not reflective of the melanin in my skin before it even made to the people trials. So if you didn't even test it on the melanin mouse, you're not about to put that in my body and say it's getting ready to be a clinical trial. So the fact that literally that was taken into consideration from the animal portion, to think about the fact that we do have a Black scientist, and I understand that to some that may not mean a lot, but it does to me when I know that there was no African Americans in the room when a lot of these decisions were being made in the past. But literally us having a Black woman that's there that realized that there are a lot of minorities that is waiting and writing on what she describes to be the answer, okay? And to understand that she's able to break that down to us in a manner of why it should work. And not even just that, the fact that they are not using a live virus. Because as I mentioned, when I thought that they were using a live virus and they were using aborted fetal cells, and when I heard that it was aborted fetal cells of a white male, I was completely offended. I was completely like, I'm not taking the vaccine because I'm not putting somebody else's DNA inside of me. I had a lot of resistance to it. The fact that they're actually using technology, being able to mirror it, it gives me confidence that I don't have to worry about getting a vaccine and having the long-term effects of COVID anyway, because they're giving me a weakened version of it and my body is building up antibodies, but I'm still going to end up suffering in the long run too. So I needed to make sure that this wasn't going to be a temporary fix. It's definitely not perfect. We got a long way to go. But one thing I will tell you is that it's a start, and nothing is wrong with being scared, because I'm going to tell you right now, with given the history, given everything that's going on, given how they primed us with all of the police shootings that we just observed and how things are being handled, I'm not telling anybody that I'm not having those same emotions that are going through my body. But this is a time where I do have to rely on the objective and not the subjective, and make the best decisions as it comes to weighing out the risk and the reward. And that's what I ask. And so we just want to make sure that we're looking to the left and the right of us, and the same people that we saw there in 2019, we're seeing them in 2020, 2021, and moving forward.
Well,
Oh, and then too, because she just put, they need to put the Black lady on the news. Look up Kismika Corbett when you get time. So I encourage you to look her up. She's done plenty of seminars. She's done plenty of meetings. And I think that it can provide a lot of insight in terms of the questions. I do know that sometimes as scientists, one of the things that we fail to do is communicate with the public in layman's terms so they can truly understand what's going on. I encourage you to look for those resources, look to see what's going on, so that way you can better understand what's happening, because that does give me hope that she understands what's going on and is able to articulate it to me in a manner. And not even just that, being able to look at the actual ingredients themselves. So this is transparency. And so right now, ask the difficult questions to the experts, send the emails, do all of that, just to make sure that you know what you're doing.
wow.
Yeah.
So much good information. And this conversation only leaves us at a point of departure. We haven't even began to look at the mental health aspect of all that's going on, right? And so it's Ree, you get ready for the next one. I reckon we should have this conversation again. Hopefully, I can bring back the same panel, because now we're establishing relationship and some trust. And let's do it again. Let's talk about it. I thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being on there. Thank you. And this was last minute. Came across this last week. They're asking for what is that doctor's name?
I'm gonna put it in the chat box for you to share in a second, okay?
Okay. We'll share that name momentarily. But we thank everyone. If nothing else, because I'm highly opinionated. But if nothing else, if we've got your wheels to turn, if we've raised your awareness to think, to be more considerate, to monitor how you do, and especially pushing people.
It's a new iPhone 12 Pro with 5G, and it's on AT&T. That's the thing with 5G networks.
It just does not work like that. Despite opinions, despite feelings, conviction, that's not the spirit of Christ, and I will not back down from that. I will not accept anything else, as evidenced by Scripture. Again, thank you all so much. Let's do this again probably after the new year. Let's enjoy the holidays. I'm tired. I turn 36 tomorrow, so I'm going to have a good day and celebrate.
Man, I want you just a little something.
So
again, for all that tuned in, thank you. We will post links of the names. Here's the name right here. And thank you, Dr. Knighton, because I Googled it and they showed me cars. And I was not talking about Corvette. Yeah, but it's good. We'll do it again soon. If you have some questions that we didn't answer, something that's really burning, please message me, message any of the panelists, contact us. We are here for you. And we're going to do this again very soon, all right?
Awesome.
Thank you. You all have a wonderful, wonderful night. Happy holidays. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.